Politics has poisoned the church, or so we're told in the latest Atlantic article talking about how politics has invaded church services to such a degree that the church is poisoned and perhaps irrefutably damaged, or irreconcilably damaged, depending on how you look at it. I'm not so sure. I think there's other things going on. I'd like to look at that and talk about that today on the channel. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm Matt Odegaard. Welcome to Church Public. Welcome back to Church Public. I really appreciate you being here today. My name is Matt Odegaard, and here on this channel, we examine church and public, what is happening in your faith and what is happening in the public square. So there's a lot going on, obviously, in both arenas, and I just want to help you understand what it means to follow after Jesus and what it means to walk out your door and live in this world and either not go crazy or keep your faith. That's my main goal, that you have faith and that you keep your faith, really to sum it up in that way. So first, before we get to this thought, this topic, this question that the article posed that I was interested in, has politics just poisoned the church, beyond comprehension or beyond repair? I want to look at what is going on with some of the Supreme Court stuff, and this was just interesting to me. I saw this go around, and I have done a lot of music. I've done a lot of worship over the years, as some of you know. And so anytime I hear worship, I hear a hymn, especially in the midst of something else weird that's going on, it piques my interest. So this one is hymns versus protests. The hymn, "'Tis So Sweet to Trust in Jesus," was played on piano in a house next to Justice Alito's house while an angry mob marched and chanted outside. I'll play this for you. Now, I know you can't really hear most of that hymn, but if you picked up a little bit of that piano, the neighbor there was just playing with his window open as loud as he could, "'Tis So Sweet to Trust in Jesus," just to take him as his word. Great old hymn. I love it. You should go listen to it if you are familiar with that one at all, and if not, maybe learn a new hymn today. But I just love that this person, and I should have grabbed the direct quote, but at any rate, they said something like, I'm going to paraphrase here because I didn't write it down, but they just said something like, there's nothing better than worshiping God in the midst of this crazy calamity. Again, that's my words. Their words were similar to it, but you get the idea. I just love that idea of worshiping, overpowering all of this thing. And the chanters and protesters going by are saying, we want justice, we want it now, or no justice now, or something like that. I mean, you get the idea. But I think it's interesting, and this is what I want to hone in on as well, because I really like the idea of playing the hymn, singing the hymn, like in the midst of this crazy adventure that we're on in the Supreme Court justices almost ruling about Roe versus Wade. Now, again, Alito is the one that wrote the decision, and so this was outside of his house, but the protesters have been outside many of the justices' houses, protesting, yelling, chanting. Many of these justices have children. Some of them have been moved for safety, which I think is a good idea. In fact, probably they all should be moved for safety at this point. But these angry mobs are chanting and protesting outside these houses. And this is actually blatantly illegal. And I know you're probably not hearing this on most of the mainstream news outlets. And in fact, Biden and Jen Psaki and countless other talking heads and internet memes are saying that peaceful protesting is good for society and they should be doing it, which we've heard peaceful protesting over the past couple years in other circumstances. But this action is actually federally illegal. It is illegal to protest in front of judges' houses. Federal law, section 1507 of Title 18 of the U.S. Code clearly states it's unlawful to protest near a, quote, residence occupied or used by a judge, juror, witness, or court officer with the intent of influencing the discharge of their duty, end quote. This should be obvious. It's obstruction of justice. It's obstructing the rule of law to tamper with witnesses, with jurors, with justices by intimidating them or their family to try to get them to decide something in the way that you, the mob, wants it to be decided. We should all know this. This should be obvious, but because we have this weird conflation of what is really the Constitution, what is really law, and what is just something that feels good that we really like to say or chant or whatever, we're in this weird place where rule of law, actual justice doesn't matter. We're just going to march down the street and say it's justice when really we just want mob rule. We just want the loudest voice to be the one in power. And that's not good. Just think of every movie, every story you've ever heard where a mob grabs their pitchforks and walks down the road. That usually doesn't end well. So it's unlawful to tamper with a Supreme Court justice by coming to their home to threaten them or harass them or influence their vote in a case before the court. So these people chanting and marching, saying we want justice in front of the justice of the Supreme Court's personal residence, are actually obstructing justice by the rule of law. The goal of this protest, clearly, and I said this from the beginning, is intimidation. The goal is to change the opinion of a judge so the mob gets their way because the mob feels they're right. And just for comparison's sake, Attorney General Merrick Garland, who is responsible for enforcing federal law, Attorney General Merrick Garland should enforce federal laws, should be doing something, and is asked, are you going to do something? And at the moment, crickets, nothing, right? And just as a reminder, the moment the National School Board Association complained about parents attending open and public school board meetings, those parents were labeled domestic terrorists by Attorney General Merrick Garland. Garland remarked at the time, quote, "Threats against public servants are not only illegal, they run counter to our nation's core values," end quote. Are judges and justices of the court, especially the Supreme Court, not public servants? And, in fact, is a parent who elects the school board and is invited to a public, open school board meeting actually breaking federal law? And which law is that exactly that they're breaking? I checked. I couldn't find a law, federal or otherwise, that a parent would be breaking by attending a school board meeting of which is public and open for taxpayers and parents to attend. And yet, in some of these cases, especially by Merrick Garland, they're labeled domestic terrorists by the Department of Homeland Security. When Jen Psaki was asked about the doxing, the publishing of the personal addresses of these justices, and the protesting in front of the justices' house, their personal addresses, some of them with kids at home, she answered, quote, "We want people to protest peacefully if they want to." And she said she did not have a, quote, official U.S. government position on where people protest, end quote. Well, actually, I just read you the official policy. U.S. Code 18, Section 1507. You can go and read for yourself. It's been sitting there in the books for decades. At any rate, we can pray for their safety and for the courage of the justices being harassed and intimidated in an attempt to upset the rule of law and the legal process, and some would call our democracy. And in the meantime, keep playing hymns as loud as you can. I love that. All right. In another kind of related story, and this is where I started, I read this article in The Atlantic, which I really don't read frequently, but apparently lots of people do. And this article was highlighted on a few Christian sites that I visit to check news stories, so it seems to have influenced some people. And when I checked The Atlantic, it was number one in their articles, most read articles right now. It's number one, How Politics Poisoned the Evangelical Church. It's a really long article. And it's mostly anecdotal stories of extreme right pastors. As I read through it, and ultimately I think I might have taken a nap reading through it. It really is that long. I didn't find an example of a far left pastor, of which I could cite many examples just off the top of my head. I make it a point to try to not call people out, so I'm not going to do that right now, but I could tell you at least as many, if not double or triple the amount of far left pastors that I can think of that are in opposition to all these far right pastors. And neither are good, right? We know that. You don't want a far right pastor, you don't want a far left pastor, and I'll get to the point in our discussion today that really what you should do is just preach the Bible, and what the Bible does as you preach through it is illustrate issues that this world is going through right now. Again, you don't have to believe me for that. Just pick up your Bible and read Romans. Just start reading Romans, the first chapter, the first 15 or 20 verses, and your jaw might hit the ground at what Paul talks about culture then in Roman time, which is still applicable to us today. So that's kind of an important place to start. Just preach the Bible. These issues will talk about themselves. They will take care of themselves. This is just what happens when you preach the Bible. And as we'll see in some of Paul's other writings, that doesn't go over well for a lot of people. But here's a couple things that I do want to pull out of this article. I think this article is is interesting. Apparently, it's very popular. And so that's the first place. Apparently, a lot of people want to know or believe that politics have poisoned the church because this article is super popular, not just on the Atlantic site, but on a bunch of other sites, as I mentioned. So why? Why is this a big thing right now? And I do want to get into a little bit of the article. I try to find things in the article over what is this article really trying to say. And again, as I mentioned, a lot of it's just anecdotal. It's I went to this church and this pastor did this thing. And okay, I mean, that is an example of what's going on, but what does that have to do with anything other than an outlying example of something that happens, whether it's bad or good? You can judge the merits and decide, is this biblical, is it not biblical? Some of the examples that were given are clearly not biblical, and I don't agree with. Some of the examples that were given were just people expressing opinions, and it's hard, and we're all human, and we all have opinions, and it seems like, to me, the writer of this article just wanted to keep all current events out of churches. And it seems like they're conflating politics and current events. The writer says this, quote, "The first piece of scripture I memorized as a child, the verse that continues to guide my own imperfect walk," great admission, I appreciate that, continue with the quote, "is from Paul's second letter to the early church in Corinth, Greece." That's 2 Corinthians. Continuing on the quote, "As with most of his letters, the apostle was addressing dysfunction and breakage in the community of believers." And this is quoting 2 Corinthians, which I'll talk about in a moment. "We fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen," Paul wrote, "since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." And I'm going to read you the full quote from 2 Corinthians in just a moment, because I think it's important to understand the context. And it's 2 Corinthians 4, just in case you want to go and check the authors of this article's work and my work as well. The author of this article, and I think this is where we kind of get down to the foundation and the crux position of this article. The author says, quote, "Paul's admonishment of the early church contains no real ambiguity. Followers of Jesus are to orient themselves towards his enduring promise of salvation," that's God's apparently, continuing with the quote, "and away from the fleeting troubles of humanity," end quote. So this author is stating there's no ambiguity in this verse at all, and the author is saying we need to focus on God's salvation and nothing about humanity. It seems like that's the writer's implication with his statement, that the crux of the piece, how politics poison the evangelical church, is because politics are a human thing, right? The human thing, not the unseen things. A seen thing, not the unseen things. The things of earth and not of heaven. The seen things and not the unseen things. I'm guessing here, but that seems like what this author is saying. And so if we're focusing on human things and seen things, we're focusing on the wrong things as Christians. I don't really understand where that's going, because we live in the world, and so obviously we need to live in the world. You and I live in it, and part of what I'm doing as Church Public is trying to help you understand that as you walk out of that door, you're literally in the world. I think we all understand that. I think we all can get a hold of that, right? Like, we're in the world, so we obviously have to be in the world and figure out how to live in this world. So as we live in this world, what are we going to do? And I would argue, as you read 1 Corinthians 4, the focus of this chapter is not to avoid human things, but rather, in the midst of persecution, in the midst of all the things, you're bound for eternity, and you should not lose hope. Verse 16 to 18 seems to clearly say this, and I'll read 1 Corinthians 4, 16 through 18 for you. "Therefore, we do not lose heart, though outwardly we are wasting away. Yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary and what is unseen is eternal." Again, you can go back and read the rest of this chapter, and I highly encourage you to do that. I'm not going to read the rest of it for time right now, but when you read this, the rest of the chapter really talks about persecution. It talks about how when you stand up for the gospel and the true things, the world is going to come against you. That's just the reality of Christianity since it began with Jesus. Jesus was killed because he stood up to power and authority. And politics, by simple definition, is power and authority and what you do with it. And Jesus stood up to that. Now, was Jesus specifically political? No, not specifically per se, but Jesus did stand up to people, and he turned tables. And then Paul talks to many of the political leaders in Acts. We talked about Acts yesterday. You should go listen to that on churchpublic.com. So when I read the rest of this exceedingly long article, I found myself trying to find the point. What is the point of showing a bunch of extreme right-wing pastors other than to vilify the conservative position? And interestingly, though not surprisingly, Trump made a lot of appearances in this article, though he has not been president for some time now. And why does this article even matter? I think it matters because apparently a lot of people read this Atlantic news website, and right now this article is number 1 on the site, and a lot of people are interested in why politics has poisoned the evangelical church, or if politics has poisoned the evangelical church, or as a statement, they think politics has poisoned the evangelical church. I think all of those things are true. I think all of those things are the view that outsiders have of the church. And it just seems like life is a series of pendulums going back and forth from one extreme to another. But I find that in the current political place we are in, up until the very recent weeks, all, and I do mean all, of the political movement was in the progressive direction. And I think this is an important point that I want to spend a time on for a few moments here. Take a moment to think about an issue in America that has moved to the right in the last 50 years, up until the last few weeks. So again, don't count this latest abortion stuff or some of the Texas stuff or the Florida Disney stuff. Before all of that, in the last few weeks or maybe year, name for me one issue that has moved to the right in a conservative way. One issue. Marriage. Nope. Gender. Nope. Sexual identity. Nope. Education. Nope. Financial issues in America. Nope. Religious freedom. Definitely not. Free speech. Absolutely not. With the exception of this latest Supreme Court drama over abortion and some of the Florida education stuff and some Texas stuff, every issue has moved to the left in the last several decades. This is just absolutely true. Progressives have moved everything to the left over and over and over again. And conservatives have lost footing on pretty much everything. Again, go through that list. Marriage and family and speech and religion. We have been told that we can't do these things in public, and we're not supposed to do these things in public. And conservative values and family values, like normal family values, those are out the window. So where does that leave us? And I think this is an interesting chart that I'm going to show you that Elon Musk recently tweeted, and it went viral. The chart is actually by a guy named Colin Wright about how the sides have moved, and it would help our discussion to look at this for a minute. So if you're not watching, I'm going to describe this chart for you. And if you want to watch, again, you can go to churchpublic.com, click on the podcast tab, and you'll find this, depending on when you're watching it, at the top or down a bit. This episode is called Has Politics Poisoned the Church? So look at this chart, and this chart shows you how politics has changed even over the last few years. In 2008, you have, I'm going to make this chart a little bit bigger for you. In 2008, you have a conservative on the right and a liberal on the left. And Elon and the author of this chart, Colin Wright, put themselves a little bit left of center. Then, in 2012, you have the conservative on the right, basically in the same place. You have the left sprinting to the left, and the caption is, "My fellow liberal?" And this person who, Elon or the other person, or many liberals, I think, find themselves in this position. They're still a little bit left of center, but even the center is moving to the left. And then finally you get to 2021 when Wright wrote this little meme. You have the conservative still on the right, basically still in the same place. The center has moved considerably left. The liberal is left now right of center, apparently. Now liberals are conservative because the center has gone left. And progressives, and this chart says woke progressives, have gone all the way to the end of this chart to the left. And of course, they're yelling bigot. And if there were space on this chart, I'm sure it would say like ist and phobes and all the other words, right? And I think this is part of the issue that we're seeing both here and in the church. We're seeing that the right, the conservative, whether it is political or whether it is Christian, has stayed basically the same. We're still saying the same thing. I can say for me, that's absolutely true. My values are based on the Bible, which we've had for a few thousand years now, a couple of thousand at least. And my conservative values are based on the Bible and the truth that I find in it. In America, again, to go back into the founders, I'm not going to spend much time on this today, but the founders based a lot of our legislation in terms of Constitution and Bill of Rights and amendments and even the Declaration of Independence on the Bible. I read for you the other day that a third of their discussions and writings about the founding documents were from Deuteronomy. And then many of them were from Paul's letters, like Corinthians, that we just looked at. So a lot of this is from the Bible, pretty much straight out. Go and read the Ten Commandments. A lot of our laws are based on those types of things. And yet, the left has continued to push to get rid of these types of things. Again, look at this. The Bible is not allowed in schools. It's not allowed in the courtroom. The Ten Commandments are not allowed in schools. They're not allowed in the courtroom. You can't pray in schools. You can't read the Bible in schools. You can't pray at your work you can't pray out loud at your work. You can't read your Bible out loud at your work. Definitely not, right? Unless you work in a Christian organization. It has been pushed out of basically every part of the public square, but that is not how the founders intended it, and specifically so because it is the baseline for morality, along with the Roman and Greek, the Western civilization style of government, the republic government that this was based on, where they married the republic form of government in Greco-Roman civilization with biblical values, and that is what got us to the founding of America. I have a book, this big red book. It tells all about that, and you can say that's not true, and they just didn't really like. But if you go and read their writings, this is just what was really going on in the day when the founding was going on. I'm not saying it was perfect. I'm just saying this is the baseline of where we have started our republic. This is not where we are now. And I think this chart is really interesting, and it's informative. And just to pull it up one more time, I mean, this is what we're looking at. And really, you could go back further than this. This is just a meme that a guy made. But I think the meme is accurate, and that we've tried to stay on the right, and the left has just moved further and further and further. And they are in crazy town now. I just read yesterday that at Target, you can buy chest binders and packers. And I'm not even going to describe what those are. If you don't know what those are, actually don't even go look those up. But you can buy things to help you look more trans at Target. This is the society that we're living in now. And this is the problem that the left keeps moving and saying these things are the normal things, and you, conservative, religious person, Christian, you are not normal. You should fall off the edge of the world because we want to go off the other edge of the world or something. And this is where we are. And yes, so back to this question, right? Has politics poisoned the church? Yes, there are extreme right-wing pastors spewing weird theories and all kinds of shenanigans. True. I would actually propose that there are more far-left pastors, and even the moderate pastors, I think, go along with this chart that the center, the moderate, has become more left. And either these moderate pastors have become silent on the important issues, or they've subtly or less so bought into leftist ideas, like critical race theory and gender theory, which we talk about a lot here. And even just as an example, I know this is outside of America, but just look at Scotland. The official Church of Scotland is about to draft a decision to let clergy marry same-sex couples. The official Church of Scotland. Wow. I know this is outside of America, but this is still in the Western civilization type of world. And we have to understand that this drift goes and it goes and it goes. And it doesn't stop going unless conservatives or Christians stand up and say, hey, reality is reality and truth is truth, and we have to stand for something. So the Church of Scotland, at the same time as they're going to allow clergy to marry same-sex couples, they say, quote, in the Constitution, this is the Church of Scotland's Constitution, in the Constitution, it has a commitment to the Bible as a supreme authority in all matters of practice. And the Christian Institute of Scotland's The Christian Institute of Scotland's officer, why can't I say that? I don't know. The Christian Institute of Scotland's officer, Nigel Kenny, thank you, took me like 4 times, said, quote, the Bible is crystal clear that true God-honoring marriage is only between one man and one woman. Jesus' own teaching on this in Matthew 19 could not be clearer, but it seems the majority of presbyters are more interested in taking their cue from culture rather than from Christ, end quote. Very tongue-tied today. I don't know what's going on. But here's the point. That is both true in Scotland and is becoming more true in denominations in America, and is a fight on some of these things that we're talking about. Do we follow the Bible? Do we follow literally what Jesus said on these things? Or do we follow the culture and do whatever we want or whatever the culture seems to want to do? This is the question, and this is where we are. This is the question of, are you conservative in the fact that you want to conserve what the Bible says and what Jesus says, or are you liberal and progressive and you want to be more like the culture because it feels nice or you like it or something? This gets us back to the article of the political poisoning of the evangelical church. I believe many churches have either intentionally or cowardly followed the culture into unbiblical practices in America. So naturally there are the swings of the pendulum the other way. The landing point should not be the far right or the far left, but the landing point should be the Bible. Interestingly, as this verse from 2 Corinthians was, I think, taken out of context for this article, the seen and unseen things, if the writer had just read the whole chapter, and in fact the whole first book of Corinthians, both books are really good, he would have come across in 1 Corinthians 1 this idea that the Bible is clear on many cultural things, and preaching the Bible is offensive to culture. That's what I said at the beginning. The Bible, the gospel, is offensive. It's foolishness. People don't like it. People won't like it. People will condemn you for just saying what Jesus said, what the Bible says, what the truth of reality is. 1 Corinthians 1:18, for the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. Where is the wise person? This is basically God talking. Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of the age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him. That's talking about when Jesus came, the world didn't understand it was actually God. I'll continue on in Corinthians. This is verse 21. God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. Again, the truth seems like it's foolish to those that are following after God. The world looks at that as foolish, but they think they're wise, and they really don't know what they're talking about. Verse 22, Jews demanded signs. Greeks look for wisdom. But we, these are followers of God, followers of Jesus. 23, we preach Christ crucified, which is a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. In other words, when you follow after Jesus, the world is not going to like it. They're not going to get it. They're going to think you're foolish. We talked about Peter and Paul the other day in Acts, that they thought he was just a babbler and just babbling incoherently about who Jesus is. And this is true today. This is how we are. Apparently, I can't even talk today. But this is the idea that, yes, there are seen things and there are unseen things. And yes, our security is in heaven. And we can lean into where our security is. We can lean into our security being in heaven. And those are the unseen things. And we need to plan for being with Jesus face to face. But at the moment, we live in this life. When Paul says to live is Christ, to die is gain, he means I'd really like to go to heaven to be with Jesus. But right now I'm alive. And so I'm going to act like I'm alive. That's kind of an important thing. We shouldn't just sit back and wait for our ticket to heaven. That is not how we were designed, and that is actually being irresponsible to the gospel that Jesus Christ has given us. Matthew 28, we're supposed to go to all nations, making disciples and baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. We are not supposed to just sit around and wait for the bus. That's not it. That's not what Jesus tells us. So if you want to follow Jesus, I mean, this isn't me talking, but I would suggest following Jesus. So what's the bottom line? Christians, pastors, church leaders, we need to follow the Bible. We need to preach the gospel, which will be offensive to the world. 1 Corinthians, we just talked about that. And we cannot tickle the ears of those that want to hear their side of things. That's 2 Timothy 4:3, when Paul tells Timothy that people are going to look for you to say what they want you to say. But that's not what we should do, because it's not the truth. We have to preach the grace of Jesus with the truth of God and let the Spirit work out in everyone's heart their salvation. And I must say, to those that don't want to be political, you already are. If you say nothing, you're now saying something. You're being cowardly, or to the left, silence is literally violence. That's what they tell us. Then, if you say what the world wants you to say, you're being complicit. You're just being like the culture. You're not being salt. You're not being light. You're not being truth. You do not have to be rude. You should not be rude. That's what we talked about yesterday, and you go back and listen to that. You don't have to be rude, but you do have to speak the truth. And politics in true form is just regulation of public life. Politics is what we do in public. We have a public life. You have a public life. Again, unless you hide out in your home for all of the hours of every day, you have a public life. And if you believe in Jesus, you take Jesus with you. You are the temple of God, and Jesus lives in you. So you take Jesus with you into your public life. So politics and religion affect what you can and cannot do in public. They affect you everywhere you go. This show is called Church Public because church refers to our faith and how we live, and public refers to the public life that we lead, and we all have a public life. And public is just a synonym for politics. Politika in Greek was taken from Aristotle, book of the same name. It's just the affairs of the city. And it's how we make decisions in groups. How do we address power struggles between individuals and groups? We currently tend to think of politics as only those things that politicians do as a job or whatever. Or once in a while there's an election and we may or may not show up to vote. But politics is so much more. Politics is our daily life as we walk around with our friends and our families and our coworkers and anyone else that we come into contact with. I think people are beginning to see this, but I'm just not sure. The decisions of politicians have caused all kinds of issues over the past few years, especially. But you and I make decisions as well. We make decisions about what we're going to buy and what we're going to watch and what we're going to wear and now what we're going to eat because every corporation is going woke, even cookies and drinks. So what are you going to do with the power you have? And you do have power. The system that has been set in this country actually was intentionally designed to give you power. The vote, not just for president, for every local office and resolution gives you a say in what happens, not only in the country, but in your state and in your city as well. This world doesn't want you to do this because this world just wants you to vote how they want. This world wants you to do what they want you to do. They are going to show up and march and intimidate you to get their way. They want mob rule, and this is not the way the country was set up, and this really isn't the way that we should live in a free society. And I'll go on one more level. The world really doesn't want you to hear this or proclaim this, but we are in a kingdom. Beyond this country, beyond any country, we are in the kingdom. We are in the kingdom of God. We have a king right now, and that king is Jesus. He may not be here in body, but Jesus is ruling over all of heaven and all of earth, and one day every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. Matthew 28, Romans 14:11, Philippians 2:10. There's a section in Corinthians, Thessalonians. This is a truth. It is a truth of life that we are in a kingdom, and this kingdom does have a king, and Jesus is the king. Therefore, your actions, what you do and don't do, make a big difference. And here's an even more popular statement. Whether or not you believe in God, you're still in his kingdom. There is a war on truth, but even more so, there's a war on reality. Men can be women, babies are not real, murder is healthcare, your online presence is who you really are, the whole metaverse. This war on reality is hitting full steam, and that is just plain and simply a war on God, because even creation, the reality itself, proclaims who God is. Romans 1:20. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. Again, Romans 1:20. You have the opportunity right now to join with God in the kingdom he has placed on this earth. You should get involved somewhere. You can parent with values and morality and faith. You can lead with courage through this chaos. You can speak truth with grace even when it is unpopular. So this question we started with was, has politics poisoned the church? I think the answer is no, not really. We've just lost our saltiness. We're supposed to be salt to the world, but we have lost our saltiness. Matthew 5:13. Jesus' followers are not supposed to be sweet like sugar and say everything the culture wants to hear. We're supposed to be salty. We're supposed to be seasoned, sometimes a little raw, to show the world what it is missing. Jesus very intentionally called us salt. He didn't call us the sugar of the world. He could have used that analogy. We could have just been the nice generation and the nice followers and just do everything nicely. But that's not what he called us to do. Now, I'm not saying don't be mean. I'm not saying be angry. Those are not the things we're supposed to do, but we're supposed to be salty. And what that means is we're supposed to illustrate and season what has gone wrong. He also calls us light to darkness. That means there is a darkness, and that means this light changes the darkness into something else. Salt changes the taste into something else. The church, instead, I think, and many believers have become saccharine, fake sweetener, giving the world exactly what it wants instead of telling the world the truth about who God is. Yeah, some of the poison came from culture, some of the poison came from politics, but mostly I think we have just stopped following Jesus and doing what Jesus told us to do. And now that some believers are saying the real kind of salty truth, the culture is literally screaming and weeping and gnashing their teeth at us. I pray that you can be salt to a fake sugar culture. And through it all, I hope you can keep the faith. That's my goal. That's my prayer for you. And for Church Public, I'm Matt Odegaard.